even if there was something, like let's say they didn't get their medications in appropriate fashion, or the care just was substandard, the medical examiner's office is still going to say it's a natural death, unless the level of neglect was so extreme that the person wound up having bed sores that resulted in sepsis, that then resulted in their death, right? Unless the neglect is so egregious, then it wouldn't be a natural death. Then the medical examiner would say it was something else, like a homicide, if it was that bad. But as far as the neglect component, the medical examiner's office does not opine on that. So to your point, I agree. And members of the public, they really focus on this natural death, and they say the same thing, that no one should die a natural death in custody because it just doesn't make sense. Well, my argument back to that is, well, then no one should die a natural death in a hospital, right? But people die natural deaths all the time in a hospital where they have the best care. People are, I'm not saying, I don't know how many of these deaths are preventable until we get the medical care, until we can opine whether or not the standard of care was what it should be.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, please do, please. No, that's what we're here for.
Okay, so another cause of severe injury and death is the placement of some of these vulnerable people with people who are aggressive and known to be aggressive. And so the placement of a person in a jail cell can result in his death. Sometimes I've seen people who have resided in jail for a temporary period of time with somebody who scared the holy crap out of them.
Right.
And they're never the same. Mentally,
That's
they're
right.
never the same.
That's right.
They're
That's right.
traumatized.
And this is a conversation, so it's so ironic to hear you saying this, because we've talked about this internally. Now, for all my years, and there are a lot of death investigations, thousands and thousands of death investigations I've either done or been part of or been present during the examination, whatever, right? But I never considered that simply being incarcerated in and of itself, I've never been incarcerated, but I can only imagine the stressor that is, and it must exacerbate medical conditions, right?
And mental health conditions.
And mental health conditions. Mm-hmm. But there's nowhere attributable on a death certificate for that. There's nowhere that the medical examiners, the medical legal jurisdiction in this country does not consider the environment in which someone dies as whether or not it contributes to the death. It's very, very interesting. And that's something that we're talking about internally, because we can make a policy recommendation all day long, but what would the recommendation have to go to? It'd have to go to the medical examiner's office for them to go against national guidelines and national standards. It's a very interesting thing. And I think we're at that point in time in this country, but specifically in this county, where we should look at that. We should look at that. So,
and Paul, haven't there been some deaths, or at least serious health causes, when people weren't given their medication? They were supposed to have their medication. Would that come down to, would that be called natural causes, or would it be drug related?
Okay. Yeah, no, it would be natural causes unless the medication was not administered purposefully for the point of hurting someone. At that point, it would be a homicide. Okay. So the natural, and that's the definition of natural from the medical examiner. So that's how come they're rated.
So it seems we need to redefine natural causes.
And that is going to be that's a national discussion for medical legal death investigation. That comes down to your medical examiners and coroners nationwide, because they go by guidelines from the National Association of Medical Examiners. And I can forward that to you folks.
That'd be great.
I can forward it to you, Ms. Brown, the guidelines that all doctors in this country use to determine manner of death. So, and then we can have maybe a further conversation and bring, I would really encourage you to bring Dr. Campman, the chief medical examiner, who is just a wonderful wealth of information. I learned from him many things 20 some years ago when I worked with him. Have him talk to you folks about this in more detail to see what next steps could be.
What is his name? I'm sorry.
Stephen. It's Stephen with a V. I believe it's a V. All the years I've known him, but it's Stephen Campman, C-A-M-P-M-A-N. And I can send Ms. Brown his email address as well.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries whatsoever. And you can tell him that I recommended he show up. So,
Follow-up question too, like,
yes.
as we're talking about, health in prison and jails, there's no one really there every day with the prisoners, right? That is just concerned about their health. The prisoners only go, I think from what I understand, they'll go to the health clinic or whatever you call it, when they ask to go and when they're experiencing some health conditions. But it seems to me that, from what I understand, that there is no integration of the healthcare system into the prisoners' daily lives. It's very separate.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I know that the incarcerated persons, they're seen by the medical professionals when they ask for it. If there's an issue, they fill out a med slip, a medical call slip.
Right.
When they ask for it, when they ask the deputies, hey, I'm not doing so well, can you, and the deputies will say, fill out the slip. But I also know that the medical personnel come around. If the person has medications, they make sure those medications are disseminated as they're supposed to be. So they get to at least have a little bit of face time with medical personnel at that time. If there are mental.
Well,
Go ahead.
in the mental health, you were just about to touch on that. Because we have anecdotal stories, folks telling us that when someone puts in a slip for mental health support, they don't get that mental health support, like zero, zip. Those
Yeah,
slips are ignored.
me too. I've heard the same thing.
You know what? And here's the problem. We've heard the same thing as well. However, we have no jurisdiction over the medical and mental health care providers. That's what we're working on, to see if these slips, to see if the medical and mental health professionals there did what they were supposed to do. We can look and say deputies responded, they did, what they're supposed to do. But that's the problem. That's what we're hearing as well. So that's how come I'm pushing real hard to get this jurisdiction, so that we can look at what these folks have done or did not do.
Can I ask you something else, Mr. Parker?
Sure.
The issue, people always, not always, but they seem like, to me, they treat the issue of drugs in jail as a separate issue. But I've known people these were people who ultimately were never convicted of a crime. So they were in as pretrial detainees.
Thank you.
So they report that you get so depressed, you get so lonesome and so overwhelmed by the whole horrid experience that you go through in San Diego County Jail, that if there are any drugs available that you can get, you take them. So it's not a separate issue. Seems like to me.
I agree. And I think that here's the issue, right? So I think that the folks who are incarcerated, to your point, this is a county jail. This is, and maybe I'm wrong, but maybe any one of us on this call could wind up in county jail tonight. Maybe, I mean, if we're arrested for something that we didn't do, or maybe we did, but we didn't, whatever, we can still get there, and we are not sentenced or we're not convicted of anything. So, but the issue comes that I think, unfortunately, these folks, by a large majority of the population, and maybe some other folks, they're looked at as kind of like, oh, well, you know what? You deserve whatever happens to you. They go in there with 3 strikes against them already, right? If they have mental illness, nobody, a lot of people are like, oh, well, if they are drug users to start with, well, you get what comes to you, and you're in jail. So many of those people have all 3. And we have to look at it from a member, like, what are we doing here? These people are not throwaway people. These are human beings, no matter what their issues may or may not be. I can tell you this. I think if I was ever in jail, I would be doing, I think, whatever I could to dull the pain, to dull the fact of why I'm even here, right? Because that's got to be something, a stressor that I've never encountered. So I agree with that. I agree. But let's see what we can do if we get that medical jurisdiction. Looking, and we'll talk a little bit about drugs here next, right? So as you can see, last year, 6 deaths of the 18 were drug related. Out of those drug related deaths, 5 were fentanyl only, I believe, and 1 was fentanyl and methamphetamine. So everybody says, and let me get to 2022, and then we'll really talk about our policy recommendations that we've done about the drugs. We know that fentanyl in this county, nationwide, but primarily in this county, is through the roof. Fentanyl use is through the roof. Fentanyl overdoses, as Dr. Cannon will tell you, are through the roof. So much so that they've had to send, for the first time in the history of the department, they've had to send their toxicology testing out to a place in Philadelphia because they can't keep up with the load of doing the testing to get them back in a reasonable amount of time because of all the drug-related deaths. So what happens in the community, you would expect you're going to see in the jails. But we'll talk about the preventative measures moving forward. So homicide, there were 2 homicides in 2021. And that is incarcerated person on incarcerated person. And then there were 2 suicides in 2021. The Sheriff's Department does deserve some credit. Several years ago, suicides were that was the topic. People were killing themselves in county jail. It wasn't the drugs. It was suicide, suicide, suicide. And the department has implemented mental health screening, more robust mental health screening upon intake, and different type of programs and step down programs. I'm not the expert on that, but I know that there are different levels inside the county jails right now. So last year they had 2 suicides. And just to prove to you, if someone wants to die, and this is what I've learned in 20 some years of death investigation, no matter what is in place, sometimes they're going to succeed. One of those suicides was an acute water intoxication. Simply means the person, for the intent of taking one's life, drank as much water as he possibly could and died. So that's the overview of the manners of death. Now, a cause of death, we've already talked about heart disease, asphyxiation by hanging, but they're all grouped into these 5 manners. So moving forward, I'm not really going to get into this. I want to talk about the deaths. Our policy recommendations. So last year in 2021, when I was the executive officer before, I really focused on policy and procedure recommendations. I went away, those recommendations went away. I came back, we're moving forward on policy recommendations. So last year, I was just getting up and running. We made 12 policy recommendations. Out of those 12 that we made, only 50% were accepted by the sheriff and or probation department. 33 were not, and we were waiting for a response on the other 2. So which ones were accepted? So we started to get into the death recommendations last year. That's why there's only a few from last year, but just real quickly, the ones that were related to death. I specifically asked, we have the jurisdiction to go to these death scenes, but for years, like when I was here before, I know that I was told by representatives of the Sheriff's Department that you're never going to be able to go to one of our death scenes, even though we have the jurisdiction to do so. Well, this year I asked again, last year, at the end of last year. And in February, we signed an MOU with the Sheriff's Department that would allow me to go to death scenes and be called out to these scenes at the time that their folks are called out. And so I've been this year to, 15. I've been to a couple of deputy involved shootings, most of the in custody deaths that have happened since February 14th, the day we signed it. And I can tell you that the Sheriff's Department has been very, very gracious with me, have been transparent with me at these scenes, have answered my questions, have allowed me to see what's going on. They've not hindered me in any way. And I want that to be known. They have let me in. De-escalation. Well, let me just talk about death. So one of the things that the Sheriff's Department was doing was, I believe in full transparency, the best, as approved or authorized by law. I think that family members of folks who die are the most important customers, for lack of a better term. They need to be communicated with. They need to be told what's going on. I think they need to be told at every step of the way, no matter what the type of death is. But the Sheriff's Department, as a matter of routine, was sealing information at the medical examiner's office. There's a law that says that the law enforcement entity investigating a death can request that the information not be released. No information released by the medical examiner. And they were doing that as a matter of routine. Everybody that died in custody. So families couldn't get information while this seal was in place. Media, community, nobody could get this information. We said, that's ridiculous. There are reasons to seal information, and that is when it's a homicide. When you don't want certain information out there because you're looking for a suspect. Now, I don't think that includes deputy involved shootings. We know who did the shooting. Why are you going to stop information from getting out? People that die in custody. If you're not hiding something, if it's not an in custody homicide, then let's release the information. And the department agreed. So they stopped doing that. So that's a good thing. That's a major win for the public. What they did not accept, and last year, there's really not much here that pertains to deaths, but they didn't accept these. And then the ones that were pending last year, we made the same recommendation to the probation department for deaths that occur in their facilities. They just responded the other day and are allowing us to do the same thing. And then this location of detention investigations unit interviews. The sheriff's department interviews incarcerated persons in front of other incarcerated persons, which doesn't lead to good results for that person who's interviewed, even if they don't say anything, even if they don't rat somebody out. When you're looked at as being interviewed by law enforcement, the assumption is you're saying stuff you shouldn't be saying. So we've asked that they move those interviews outside of the view of other incarcerated persons, and we have not received a response on that yet. So 2022, now I chose to do a semi-annual report. Now this is a little later, it was in August, but instead of just waiting, because annual reports really, they're kind of old by the time they come out. The information is kind of old, right? So I want to try to be as timely as possible. So I thought, well, if we do this twice a year, at least it's more relevant, more pertinent, and we can talk a little bit more, have a better conversation. So as of August 20th, this is what our stats were. But look at these complaints. Remember last year in 2021, it was kind of like 51-45 sheriff's law enforcement to sheriff detention. Look at it now. As of the end of August, 60% of the cases that we're investigating are coming from the detention facilities, to include all the deaths. It's cut down the percentages on the others, except court services. Court services is through the roof. 10% of our total number of cases from court services personnel, that's a big deal. And again, they're the folks that do the evictions and they work in the courts. So we're seeing an influx of those type of complaints. But let's go to the deaths again. So through August 20th, now I'm going to add 3 deaths here. Okay. So since that time, you see now it says 16. Since August 20th, there have been 3. So we're at 19 now, 19. The other numbers, I think that Sheriff Law Enforcement Services may have added 1, but I'm focused on the detention facility. There are now 19. And let's talk about those. Here they are right here. So the numbers go up. There was 1 at Central, so add 1 there. So that's 9, and then add 2 to George Bailey. That's 5. So that would be increase the percentages. Actually, it drops the percentage for Central a little bit under 50%, but Bailey increases pretty substantially. So that's it. Las Colinas had 2 so far this year, and Vistas had 3. Ethnicity, as we talked before, pretty much the same as last year, as you can see, with the exception of 1 Filipino, and then other Asian, I believe was Chinese, I believe. And I don't know the ethnicities of the other 3 that have died. That'll tweak this a little bit. I think 1 or 2 were Latinx, and then the other one I think was white. Now, here is, remember last year we had it all figured out. We knew what the manners of death were, but this year we don't. We don't have many because the medical examiner's office is behind. And any situation in which drugs would be expected or thought to be contributory to death, they're going to have to do toxicological testing, and that's going to take some time. So right now, we don't have matters. We have 3 of them that were natural, 1 of which was COVID, but the others at this point are pending. So that's the findings again, and we won't talk about that. Okay, so recommendations. As of August 20th, we made 26 recommendations. And since that time, we made an additional, I think 6 or 7. I'm looking at my numbers over here. So the ones that were accepted and not. Here are the ones that were accepted. We contend that right now, if you're wearing a Fitbit, it's monitoring your pulse and respirations. Like, there has to be a way that you could have a wristband or something on incarcerated persons that would monitor that. So you would know when they're beginning to have issues with their heart, if their pulse is going down, the respirations are going down, before they're found on a check unresponsive. So we've made this recommendation. There are other entities in this country that are doing this. They're smaller. They don't have the numbers that the Sheriff's Department has. Now, the Sheriff's Department responded to us and said, yes, we are going to research these devices. Yes, once we come up with something, we're going to incorporate the device usage. So those first two, have they unveiled or unrolled or rolled out anything yet? Not to my knowledge, but I hope that they do. There's no reason why they can't do this. Yes, okay, money. All right, well, I think this board of supervisors would acknowledge, as they already have, that the deaths in custody it's a major, it's like a public health issue in this county, right? So there has to be a way to fund saving lives. So those are the two. They say they've implemented, but we haven't seen anything just yet. We want them to strengthen the family liaison protocol because families constantly tell us that they were not being communicated with during the process. The department says they have been communicated with during the process, and the family members are just either they're grieving or they don't remember, or they're just not being honest. So they have strengthened their protocol at our request to meet with them at the conclusion to give them everything. What I found for 20 some years, it's almost like I was always taught as a death investigator, what you don't tell someone during a death notification or subsequent interactions, they're going to fill it in themselves because they don't know anything else. And they're usually going to fill it in with the worst possible scenario. That's what's happening here. These deaths, nobody's saying it's not a big issue. It's huge. But many of these families that I talked to, all they wanted was information. And as I'm talking to them, when I'm telling them what was going on during the, what happened, at least they have something, which lately they haven't been getting much, if you are to believe what they tell us. And I do. We made a major recommendation to provide naloxone to the incarcerated persons themselves. Every deputy has it, but there are internal jail politics that tend to indicate if you're an incarcerated person, you don't ask for deputies until the shot caller tells you to ask for deputies. The shot caller in each race or on that module or whatever. So there's all these politics involved. So we don't want people just sitting there being unresponsive. If the incarcerated persons have access and they were provided access based on our recommendation, and at least one life has been saved since then. We have recommended that they had, at the time we made this recommendation, they had one fentanyl trained fentanyl detection dog. They now have 3, is my understanding.
Oh, good.
We want them to sniff all people coming into facilities, to include staff. Anybody comes in there, they need to be scanned or sniffed something. The department responded, we said it should be shall be sniffed. And the department wrote back and changed their policy to may sniff. So that's that. Now, Sheriff Ray will tell you, and the executive management of the Sheriff's Department will tell you that their data indicate that the drugs are getting in 2 ways, from the incarcerated persons themselves and through the mail, not staff. And I contend, and I've said this in public, I said at the Board of Supervisors, maybe the data exists, but it's not going to exist if you don't look for it. I mean, if you're automatically just saying it doesn't happen that way, that's not what who knows? I'm not saying that there are bad deputies. That's not what I'm saying. I have no proof of that, but the numbers would indicate the drugs are getting in, maybe staff, maybe contract personnel. I don't know.
Could the drug sniffing dogs check the mail?
I believe that they do. They have a mail processing center at Las Colinas. Every piece of mail is sorted there at the mail processing. And I believe that they do if they're called to do so. And that would be something that perhaps the sheriff himself could opine if you were to ask him. But my understanding is that they do. But we made some recommendations about the mail. We'll get to that in a minute. But the concern for me is that they're not willing. They put may and not, shall. And I understand it's a resource issue, especially when you only have one dog and you have all these people coming in and out. But we want to just throw it on our radar. And they did say may. And that's in their policy. So what else? They implemented pre-employment screening for bias. They said they've been doing it all these years, but we made a recommendation to ensure, because everything that you look at indicates that implicit bias training doesn't necessarily help. I mean, you have people who have had 30, 40, 50 years to have their biases set, right? And all of a sudden you're going to do a 4-hour block of instruction or an 8-hour block of instruction, and you expect that that's going to undo everything. It starts with the pre-employment screening, and the department's committed to screening for that bias. And then we talked about their body worn camera recording. And so they've implemented those. But back to what they have not. Now, I won't get into this too much because that's not why I'm here. But every one of these recommendations that we made right here that they did not accept talk about racial disparity. There have been 2 studies that indicate that there are racially disparate practices occurring at the sheriff's department. So we've recommended a couple of different things here to specifically not contact people for lower level offenses. For example, if you go park your car and you're at a meter and it runs out, are you contacted by a deputy? No, you come back to your car and there's a ticket on your windshield. If you in certain jurisdictions run a red light, are you contacted by law enforcement? No, you are not. You get a ticket in the mail to the registered owner. It's the same thing that we're asking for these vehicle related ones with the registration, or, if it's not a true public safety event, because data indicate that persons of color are more likely than not to be contacted for these circumstances. Interestingly enough, the governor just last week, we recommended not contacting people for jaywalking unless it was a public health hazard. And the department said, no, we're going to contact people. The governor just made it, decriminalized it as of January 1st of next year, jaywalking, unless it's a public health, unless you step in front of a vehicle or something like that. So all of these things here, no go. They said that if they were to implement these things, that it would actually wind up being reverse racism. Like and it would take, like, these are laws being broken in front of deputies, and that would be very detrimental to the public to not have deputies enforcing them. I understand to a point, but I think there needs to be something done about racially disparate policing, at least a concern that that's what's happening, and that's what the data indicates. But next, as far as not accepted, okay. We actually also said, do not, this is about a death, right? Do not. Is law enforcement getting into these high-speed pursuits of stolen vehicles? I get it. It's a crime. I understand that. But it's a property crime, if nothing else, right? Unless it's a carjacking or used in a violent crime, I get it. Because we had a case last year where deputies initiated a pursuit. The vehicle was stolen. The vehicle runs a red light, hits someone, and kills a 21-year-old female coming home from work. So we say, is that really what we're here to do? Is that what law enforcement's here to do? They said, no, we're not going to implement that policy recommendation. The one on the right, this is a major deal. We asked that incarcerated persons being transferred between one facility and another are scanned. When they are booked, initially, they're scanned. They have body scanners, they're scanned, they're searched. But when they are transferred from Central to Bailey, or they go to court and then they go to something and they come back, they're not. So the response was, no, we're not going to do this because it would lead to operational delays. They don't have the equipment. And also it would lead to a backlog in folks, kind of operating the jails. The Board of Supervisors, I don't know if it was because of our recommendation, but they put some money aside for them to purchase additional body scanners. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if that changes their mind on this recommendation we made. But I think you folks would agree we are being extremely as proactive, and I'm going to continue to make recommendations. So for example, here are the ones that we're asking for a response on. And this doesn't even include the ones we made last night, which I could talk about. Let's just talk about the ones about death. Digitally scan and disseminate non-legal mail. Mail comes in. If they're saying that mail is the top 2, why not? Right now, every incarcerated person at the jail we can email them. We can communicate with them via email. So instead of handing them mail that has been searched, obviously by mail processing folks, but why maybe just make a photocopy of that and hand it to them on county issue paper, so there's nothing soaked into the paper, there's nothing hidden anywhere in the materials. Somehow digitally scan it and disseminate it to them that way. We proposed some kiosks that you can do, or just handing them the mail that's on other paper. I don't know. I'm certain that they're going to say no to that. Physically search or scan all persons entering detention facilities. Same thing here. Back with the dog. Now we're saying everybody, to include staff, make them walk through a metal detector. And you might say, well, what's a metal detector? Well, why would you want someone? Well, how's that going to stop drugs? It may not stop drugs per se. It may stop phones being brought in. It may stop something being brought in. Who knows? And if you have the dogs there and the scanning, I don't know. But nobody should be off limits when they enter a detention facility. Nobody. And so they already went back. They didn't officially respond to us, but they went to the Union Tribune and said, we're not going to do this. We're definitely not going to implement this policy that CLERB is making, this recommendation. So we know that that's not going to happen. And then in reference to, those are the ones about death. So last night, I made a recommendation for them. They have a policy that says that they will search their transport vehicles. So when people are taken to court and taken back to court or taken to medical appointments, but there's no recommendation. There's a policy that says these searches have to be documented anywhere. So I don't know if they're getting done. There's nobody's being held accountable for whether or not they're done or not, because there's no documentation. They can just say, yes, I've done it. Now, I get it. You can also write something up saying you've done it too, but at least this may force the issue to document these searches, because it's possible in some of the other Southern California detention facilities, those jurisdictions think that the drugs are coming in on the buses. So why not tackle it that way? So that's where we are, and I can go on forever. We made the same recommendations to probation. We're still waiting to hear back from them. That's my death overview, if that helps even a little bit. But that's where we are. So otherwise, I think, how about this? How about we just open it up if you have any questions about what we just talked about.
I do.
I have a question.
I'll let everybody go first. Yeah.
I have a question about sniffing. Do drugs smell or something, or what?
Well, these dogs are trained. Yes, the dog sense.
Not the dogs.
Yeah, so they are trained to detect these drugs. Some of them are trained to detect certain drugs, like like when you go through a border patrol checkpoint or something like that. They're usually sniffing for marijuana or something, or even explosive dogs. These dogs now that they have are specifically trained to pick up fentanyl, because that is the number one issue. That is the issue. So
Well,
yes.
I was thinking it was persons. You have to sniff the persons. I didn't realize you were doing the dogs. I know the dogs. Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. What else? Anybody have anything else?
Yeah. Can I ask, Jeannie, you go. I saw your hand.
Okay, this is somewhat off the topic, but I wrote a list of questions. The use of force decisions, do you have any oversight on that?
Yeah, we anytime we get an allegation that excessive force was used, we investigate that. And we ask for all body-worn camera. We ask for any recordings. We ask for all reports, anything that we can get that would give us the deputy's perspective. And then, of course, we talk to the complainant. One of the things that we also, the Board of Supervisors gave us jurisdiction in July of 2020 to, without a signed complaint, to investigate uses of force resulting in great bodily injury. Great bodily injury being defined as any kind of broken bone, loss of function of a limb or an organ, concussion. So even if someone breaks a tooth, a nose, has concussion, we get those cases. The department gives them. They are mandated to report them to us, because they report them to the state too. So everything they're reporting to the state, they report to us. So we are investigating those complaints as well. And thus far, interestingly enough, we've not sustained. We have not said that a use of force as of yet has been outside of policy. And we have the person I just hired as our most recent investigator to bring us up full staff is a use of force instructor from Northern California, who worked in a probation department up there. And I'm having him look at these cases as well. And so far, no sustained findings.
Now, the one reason I brought that up was there was an article in today's paper. There was a $5 million suit that
Yeah, saw that.
the county lost. So
Saw that.
how much has anybody kept track of how much money the county is losing for these sort of things?
I'm sure county council has. I have not. That was a case from 2014. It was about a canine, and
Yeah.
we get any canine bite. Any
Mhm.
canine bite, we're investigating. And
Okay.
thus far, we have said that the dogs have been utilized appropriately. Now let's keep in mind that was in 2014. So what's that? 8 years ago. but we're still, we get every one. If there's a bite up, that's not true. We get every canine bite in which there's great bodily injury. So something that results in stitches or something like that. So if we don't get the ones if they bite in the clothes and there's no wound. But the ones we've looked at thus far, so good.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer?
Yes. Are the investigations of deaths made public at the end?
The only thing that's made public and one of the things I'm also trying to do, and I've been pushing, and I've asked our board of our county to make as part of their county legislative program, any kind of law that is put forth during the legislative cycle that would tend to increase the transparency of civilian oversight of law enforcement. In 2006, there was a court case that stemmed from San Diego County. And since 2006, everything we do pertaining to the specifics of an investigation, to identify deputies, to discuss a case, to discuss an investigation in public, it has to be behind closed doors. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So what we released, the only thing that we used to release back in the day, we released our whole investigative report. But now we can only release a very small snippet, and it's on our findings report after the meeting of what we came up with. It's ridiculous.
I read the case of just call him Mr. 19 that died a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
He was in a fight with people.
Yeah.
Where in the hell was he? Was he walking up and down the aisles and the inmates came out and attacked him? Or I mean, I just don't understand how these things could happen in jail. And they don't even hear people screaming or what's going on. They don't have cameras that are showing that this man is being attacked.
They do. Depends on the area of the
I'm
facility.
sorry, I just get so upset.
No, I understand too. They do have the cameras, and sometimes these attacks occur where there are no cameras. I mean, you think that the incarcerated persons know where there are no cameras as well. I mean, sometimes there's areas that are not covered. I'm not saying that's the case here. I can't really talk about this since it's under investigation, but you know, the deputies, you know, they respond and they break it up, and but unfortunately, you know.
Well, and then also what I came to think about when I read these cases, they just give you a little bit of information, is it sounded like person number 19 had been there since March, or had just been put into one of the detention facilities. And so has he been sentenced, or just has he even gone to court yet? Any of these cases, they're just sitting there in jail for how long?
Oh, I can tell you that our independent analysis that we did over the deaths that occurred in the county from 2006 to 2020, actually I lied, 2010 to 2020, the majority of the folks who died in custody, of course, were unsentenced. Now, here's the thing. They're unsentenced, but what is reported to the state, which is where we got the numbers, what is reported to the state, it doesn't say, there's no box for an entity to check off whether they were even convicted, whether they were convicted. So who knows, right? One of the things, and again, I'm not calling anybody out here, but I would tell Sheriff Gore this to his face, and I've said this to the Board of Supervisors, and I've said it at our meetings. One of the things that Sheriff Gore used to say, I have a lot of respect for Sheriff Gore. I liked him as a person. I never had a problem with Sheriff Gore. One of the things he used to say was, the reason our numbers are so high compared to other counties is because we are the end all be all. Like if someone gets arrested in this county and they get booked, they come to our facilities. Whereas in other counties, they go to local, local municipalities have their own booking. So he's saying that the deaths that happen, they're happening in other counties at these other facilities, right? Because they happen quickly. They happen within a day or two before they get to county jail. I can tell you, over the last 2 years, the death cases that we have fully investigated and closed, that's not true. Only a small percentage of the folks have died have died or become ill or injured that resulted in their death from 0 to 6 days, minimal. Most of the people that are dying have been there 30 plus days, 101 plus days. This year so far was 9 people that were there 101 plus days.
Oh my gosh.
So that argument to me holds no water.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and Stephanie and then Joni.
And I just wanted to clarify one thing about the amount of time people spend in jail before they're sentenced or convicted or whatever. There are statutory guidelines, 30 days for misdemeanor, 60 days for a felony. It got mixed up with the pandemic, obviously, because people couldn't come to court. But if you exceed those days, you need the permission of the defendant personally. Now, their lawyer can talk them into it. But I just want you to think that, to know that the sheriff isn't the one that's in control of how long somebody's staying in custody before they're brought to trial or sentenced. So I'll be
That's
quiet now.
No, thank you, Stephanie. That's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joni?
I have a kind of a broader question here. Two. One is that having dealt with the county on a number of public benefits programs for people who were eligible for programs and could never get the help they needed, okay? We approached the county with the same sincerity and diligence that you did, and we found them willing, finally, after a number of efforts to extend and continue the dialogue, they finally formed a working group and made 60 some recommendations. And the working group did, and then the county accepted a number of them, just like they're doing in your case. There was never any follow-up. There was never any accountability. And I saw recently that the very same recommendations that existed 10 years ago are now still on the docket, not having been fulfilled. So that's one concern I have, because you take a guy like you who's trying to work in that very special interface between the public that's concerned and the people who are doing the job, right? It's a difficult space. So you do your very best to make sure that you're communicating well and you're not antagonizing people so they lose sight of the issues.
Right.
But then you get this big list of recommendations. Yes, we'll do this. No, we won't do that. Yes, we'll do that. And on the yeses, you never get anything solid. You really don't know if you have made a profound change in
Right.
the outcome. You can't even find the causality. If this recommendation that was implemented, it had an effect. That's number one. Number two is the way they run the county jails is so despicable and so based on a model of deprivation, just sheer freaking deprivation, that it's almost peripheral to me, all the rest of the recommendations that you guys make. As hard as you work at it, as much as you care, when you treat people the way they feel entitled to treat them, with nothing in the way of hope. I mean, people don't, I know from my own experience, people don't need that much hope to get through the night, even in difficult circumstances, but they, for God's sake, need some. And those jails do a crappy job of providing any morsel of hope.
To your point, I'll simply say this. I'll say it anyway. I don't usually hold back, right? Does San Diego County, does the Sheriff's Department specifically have the right type of oversight in place for it right now? No. We're not the right type of oversight. I mean, here's what I could, as I think you all are seeing in this room, and I think everybody, members of the public, are seeing, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work within, trying to push the boundary of what I'm legally entitled to do. Okay. And I think that the most effective we can be is to make these recommendations after we look at these death cases. Because quite frankly, even if we say, okay, this deputy did something he or she shouldn't have done, okay, that may not prevent another death. I think the policy and procedure recommendations will prevent other deaths. I think getting medical jurisdiction will prevent deaths. However, the model that we have, I think I saw a comment. There's no follow-up I can do. I can make these recommendations all day long. The department can say, yes, we're doing it. But I technically don't have the authority to ask them, please provide me the number of staff members that your dog has sniffed. Please provide, this or that, right? I don't have it. What we need in this county, and what I'd like, I have a long-term plan here. Okay, I'm not going anywhere unless the board fires me. It's always possible, but I would like us to have a model of oversight that allows the auditing function to occur. that allows some kind of monitoring. We can make these recommendations and then monitor how that's happening, if it's being implemented or not. We don't have that. LA County has an Office of Inspector General. Orange County has an Office of Inspector General. Now, I might be talking myself right out of a job. Those folks are lawyers. I am not. But I think, they have the ability to just have access internally. That's what this county needs now more than ever. So I'm going to continue to push for that, even if it's pushing me out of a job and bringing somebody else in. This county needs that. So hopefully that answers, or at least addresses, the concern that you just brought up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I had one last question. So isn't there a law that requires that when a body takes into custody someone else, that they're required to, that they're responsible for their safety?
Oh, they're absolutely.
So-
Their own policy says that.
So
Yeah.
can't they be sued for obvious neglect?
And they are, and they have been a lot. Yes. Yes.
But the suits don't require change of behavior?
I don't know what the department, if the department does an analysis after a lawsuit, which they should, I'm sure they do. They have a lot of legal folks, and they'll do an analysis. And then any changes that they need to make internally, I'm sure will come from that analysis of litigation. I see Stephanie might have something to say about that.
No, actually, I thought we were coming towards the end, and I wanted to thank you because I'm just so impressed with your recommendations and your ability to see the big picture, that it's really nice to have somebody in charge. So
Thank you.
that's my only comment.
Thank you so much. That means a lot, because I'm not going to lie. I mean, even like last night, right? We had a long meeting. We were meeting for 4 hours. We didn't get out at 9:30, something like that. I remember I remember getting off the call and trying to go to bed and thinking, am I making a difference here? Am I making a difference? Because I can't stay somewhere where I'm not making a difference, right? I mean, that's why I leave places. I gotta, but I think we are, I think we are. I think we're doing everything we can within the confines that we have.
And how can we help you make a difference?
I think what you're doing now, just even being interested in what's going on and bringing me here to get at least an independent assessment of the deaths and what's happening and what's not happening. Any way that you could support strengthening this organization or civilian oversight, I don't want to make it about me or CLERB, but in general, civilian oversight of the Sheriff's Department. What is the appropriate model and what is really needed right now? I think that if there's a way that you folks could talk about that, I think that's really all that can be done. If the public starts to say, hey, you know what? Okay, this model we have under this executive officer and this current CLERB, they're trying. But again, as I said when I started this presentation, we are only as effective as the departments allow us to be. Well, how good is that?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's been the struggle with, because the city of San Diego is also looking at police oversight, right?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they
And so
are.
we have the ordinance that's passed by 85% of the people, and there's still pushback on making sure it's implemented the way it was written.
Yep, that's right.
But even implemented the way it was written, what I hear you saying is it's still a tough just a road to haul, right?
Oh,
to make
I can tell
right.
you, the city of San Diego board right now has many years in front of it. It's a long road. We have been through that long road. No matter what I say to you folks or in the board, in the public or whatever, I want you to understand, to me, the Sheriff's Department has been responsive as best that they can be, right? This is not an adversarial relationship. I don't look at it like that. This is not. I tried to propose a vision last night for us, for the board. I think our true role, like if we should be helping the departments provide the best possible service to those folks that are under its care.
Right.
That's what we're here to do. I can tell you this, the San Diego board, San Diego PD is not a big fan of that.
Oh,
board.
I know. We've had pushback.
It is going to be years and years before, because they're gonna have to work through everything that we've already worked through back in the 90s.
I know, but we already went through this, right, in San Diego back in 1989.
Yes,
And-
we did.
And we ended up with the, with the police officer's version of what police oversight should look like, and it didn't work, right?
Right.
So it depends, really now trying to move the power away from one person. I mean, that's one of the big changes in the current, is to move it away from the mayor's office and then disperse it amongst the city council members. And the other thing that I think you mentioned is that there's really no way to enforce like staff, how you I don't even want to use the word punish, but how you make sure that staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing. There's no disciplinary enforcement. In the San Diego version, they're trying to enact that. That's what the POA is pushing back against, is that there is some disciplinary recommendations that will be part of that investigation. I don't think you can do that in CLERB, do you?
Well, yeah, get this. If we sustain a finding, our rules and regulations allow us, we're supposed to be provided the discipline history of the subject officer. That's what our rules say. To be
Right.
provided that so we can make an appropriate recommendation on discipline. The department has not done that, I don't think has ever done that, and will not do that. They will not provide us that information so that we can make an appropriate recommendation. So what our recommendations are simply this. Please use progressive discipline to, however you folks think is best, right? Because we don't have the access because of the law,
Well, make
Ruthie
it-
and then Joni, and we probably should let Paul have a
Okay,
break
thanks.
here.
I'll try and make mine quick, but Paul, I think you are making a difference. And,
Thank you.
I mean, we follow as much as we can through the paper and appreciate the work that you do. But I often wonder, is there a common thread of arrest for a lot of these people that say end up dying in jail? And I mean, has jail just become a holding tank for people that should really be someplace else, like a mental health facility? And I also wonder if the restructuring of bail could be a preventative measure so that people didn't have to be held for so darn long while they're awaiting trial. And
Absolutely.
maybe that's a more effective place for a group like ours to work, I mean, just in a preventative measure.
Absolutely. I agree with what you said. And as far as I'm trying to think back just off the top of my head, every single death case, every person who dies, we look at, we also know why they were in custody. And there's really nothing jumping out at me that's like a common theme. It seems to be all over the map, all different kinds of charges that they were in there for. It's not like, I really can't.
Not
opine on
just
that
like
right
for
now.
acting crazy on a street corner or.
Well, sometimes, I mean, there are some of those that are obviously mental issues, right? Or drug induced or something. But yeah, I think that anything that can be done to ensure that people don't get into the jail, that's the best preventative measure you can take, right? So I don't know how to go about that. I just know that, once they're in jail, there's a threat.
Mhm.
But will it make a difference who we vote for chief of
What
jails?
was your question, Margie?
Will it make a difference of who we vote for chief or the new police
For
chief?
sheriff,
Sheriff, yeah, sheriff.
Yeah, I think I'd like to think so. I would like to think so, that it would make a difference. All the attention, I will say this, since the audit, the state audit, and our independent death analysis, data analysis, the department is being responsive. They're addressing what's in the audit. They're addressing the concerns that are there, the recommendations. It's just a matter of whoever comes in as sheriff. They're not really gonna have much of a choice. They're gonna have to address this, right? I think that what's out there for the voters is, do you want someone who's been there for a very long time, or do you want someone to come in for a fresh slate? Who knows? There are pros and cons to both arguments, right? So I can, all I know is that I've never worked with Mr. Hemmerling. I can tell you that in his most recent UT editorial interview, he mentioned CLERB several times. I could tell you that. Under Sheriff Martinez, I worked very closely with her. She signed the MOU that allowed me to go to death scenes. So I'm very much, that's a big deal for her to do that. So again, I can't tell you who I'm going to vote for, but I can tell you just the pros and cons, like it's the most important election right now in this county.
And for 6 years.
It's going to be the most important one.
Yeah. Joni?
Okay, I just want to ask this one last question. You said that in your review of these instances where you've gone, looked at all the information, you haven't found officers acting outside of the boundaries of policy and regulations. But my question is, have
For
you
excessive
ever had-
force, for
Okay,
excessive force.
for
We have
excessive
sustained findings on other issues, of course. But so
But-
far, excessive force, no, not since I've been here.
So in the review of those cases, have you ever personally had the feeling that there's too much latitude in some of these policies and regulations, or that there's a misplaced permission, that they're too vague, that they're too broad, that they don't give enough description, or is that not something you found?
No, it is something we found. But having been a former police officer too, now, it goes with they have a policy about use of discretion, right? They can, deputies can use their discretion as long as they can articulate why they did what they did, or why they violated, or why they didn't follow this specific policy. I know, you hear law enforcement all the time say, well, you can't judge me. You never walked in my shoes. Well, I have. And, but I do know about split-second decisions, and I do know the difficulty in trying to keep what is this? What is it? But I think the times that we have found that their policies have been lacking, that's why we're making the recommendations for them to strengthen it, because they are too vague. There is no timeline. For example, last night we made a recommendation to put a time limit on when the department notifies a family when their loved one is taken to the hospital in serious condition. There's no time. It says that they'll notify them. It doesn't say when they're going to notify them. So we do try to tighten that up. It's very difficult to tighten up spur of the moment decision policies, right? But the policies that there's some time and reflection on what the proper course of action should be for the community, we really try to tighten those up.
That makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Paul. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
First time you came, we learned so much, and I thought, well, let's see if he has more to say. And boy, did you.
I'll come back whenever you want.
Yeah.
We'll talk as much as you want. Thank you, folks, for what you do. Thank you for trusting in me and believing in me, and what we're trying to do, and for everything you're doing as well, to care about the folks who are in the custody. They're not throwaway people. They are valuable. And we're going to try and do everything we can to reduce the number of deaths in custody of the detention facilities. So thank you.
Thank you.
You all. My
Thank you.
best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.